Hey guys, tonight we crawl under the musty tapestries of medieval life and discover something squirmy. You find yourself wandering through a stone-walled apothecary, dimly lit by flickering tallow candles, their smoke curling like question marks above your head. The shelves creak under the weight of dusty jars, some filled with herbs, others with things that move a little too much for comfort. Something scuttles across your boot. You do not scream yet. We're going deep into the weird, wonderful, and absolutely questionable world of insects in medieval medicine. Yes, this is the moment your high school health teacher warned you about. And no, you probably won't survive this emotionally intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open a warped wooden door and step into a narrow storeroom lined with linen bundles. The scent hits you first. Not unpleasant, but earthy, metallic, a bit swampy, like someone stored soup in a boot. And then you see them. Leeches, rows of clay pots, each with a damp cloth lid. Inside, slick black leeches wriggle languidly like tiny goth noodles. Back in the 12th century, this wasn't horrifying, it was housekeeping. Physicians of the time believed leeches were basically your body's janitorial crew, suckling out bad blood to restore balance. What balance meant exactly? Well, nobody really agreed, but if it's bleeding, it's healing became a vibe. You pick up a linen pouch, and surprise, it's slightly damp. A tag reads, "For toothache, 2 to 3 leeches, apply under tongue." Yeah, let's skip that and file it under nope. Fun fact, leeches were often kept not in medical chambers, but in linen closets. Why? Because the moisture and darkness were perfect for keeping them alive and docile. Also, some monks didn't like looking at them, so tucking them in with the napkins seemed reasonable. The church, ever eager to weigh in on all things bodily, declared leeching permissible, but only for just causes, which, apparently, included headaches, melancholy, and neighbor-induced spite. Historians still argue whether leeches were actually effective beyond basic wound decongestion. Some say the limited bloodletting helped minor inflammations. Others say it was all medieval placebo and some very committed worm cosplay. You notice a stool near the fireplace. On it, a leather-bound notebook full of ink sketches. You flip through drawings of bodies with circles around knees, temples, and suspiciously unlabeled private areas, all prime leeching zones. There's a small doodle of a nun with a leech mustache. Hilarious or terrifying. Your call. The apothecary himself, long gone from this world, left behind not only jars, but a curious instruction. Do not name them. It invites attachment. You glance at the jar beside you. A particularly chonky leech blinks at you. Or maybe it just squelches menacingly. A window opens and a cool breeze rustles the herbs hanging from the rafters. You step outside, blinking in the late afternoon sun, clutching a new pouch labeled medicinal larvae, and silently regretting everything. But wait, your journey through insect medicine is only just beginning. Because while leeches were the headliners of this creepy-crawly lineup, they were far from the only wriggly wonders in the medieval medical playbook. There are beetles to crush, butterflies to steep, and crickets to sip. Yes, sip. So you adjust your cloak, roll your eyes at your own curiosity, and head down the cobbled path to the next chapter of this itchy history. Let's just hope it doesn't involve anything that jumps. The street narrows as you head deeper into the marketplace, ducking under fluttering pennants and passing stalls that smell vaguely of boiled roots and regret. A vendor calls out, offering something wrapped in oiled parchment. You decline politely, then realize he was holding a jar of what appear to be beetles. Large, black, gleaming beetles, their legs frozen mid-scuttle. You're told they're for hair loss. You pause. Touch the top of your head. It turns out, in the late Middle Ages, thinning hair wasn't just a cosmetic concern. It was a spiritual crisis. People believed that baldness might reflect internal imbalance, divine disfavor, or excessive thinking, which, honestly, feels a little personal. Enter the beetle cure. Apothecaries swore by a recipe involving ground beetles, often blister beetles, famous for their defensive toxins, mixed into a warm paste of vinegar and herbs, then slathered generously onto the scalp. The goal? Stimulation. The result? Well, sometimes you got hair, sometimes you got blisters, sometimes you just smelled like crispy arthropod and betrayal. One documented case from a small town in what is now southern France involved a wealthy merchant who swore by this remedy. He claimed it restored his youthful crown. Historical records also suggest he wore a hat indoors. So, draw your own conclusions. Historians still argue whether beetles in these concoctions did anything beyond irritate the scalp. Some say the cantharidin found in blister beetles could stimulate blood flow, encouraging hair follicles to wake up. Others think it was just a great excuse to feel like you were doing something, anything, about that growing bald patch. You duck into a shop with a wooden sign shaped like a comb. Inside, shelves overflow with bowls of powder and bottles labeled in shaky Latin. You spot a mortar with iridescent green bits still clinging to the sides. A sign reads, "New shipment, freshly dried beetles, premium shine." Next to it, a parchment scroll lists side effects in tiny script. Tingling scalp, mild dizziness, burning regrets, possible beetle-based dreams, You also find a peculiar tool, a comb with beetle legs embedded along the handle. It's decorative, allegedly, but the shopkeeper says it helps infuse the spirit of the cure. You quietly put it down before you absorb any more spirit. Fun fact: some medieval physicians believed that beetles absorbed human essence when applied to the skin. This made them not just medicine, but also a kind of parasite-powered sympathy magic. So, yes, you were essentially rubbing sympathetic mind bugs into your skull and hoping for the best. You exit the shop, scalp tingling slightly from proximity. The sun catches on a passing helmet, perhaps a knight, perhaps just a very prepared merchant. He's bald. You wonder. Winding your way back toward the village square, you pass a group of children playing a game that involves throwing beetle shells into a painted circle on the ground. One child insists her beetle is blessed. Another says his will grow legs again and run away before the final round. You don't ask what the prize is. You don't want to know. You stop to rest on a stone bench, watching bees hover lazily around the herb garden across the way. Their buzzing is oddly soothing. Not all insects were feared or burned or mashed into paste. Some, it seems, were companions in healing and mystery. But you'll get to the bees later. For now, you ponder the effort, how much time, energy, and crushed exoskeletons went into maintaining a full medieval mane. You look down at your own reflection in a puddle and think, maybe hats weren't such a bad idea after all. You rise and stretch. Time to leave the beetles behind and continue your curious crawl through the medical menagerie. The next path leads towards something smaller, something sneakier, something with wings, a bad reputation, and a knack for showing up uninvited. Yes, next up are flies. And let's just say they've been waiting. You round a corner and the scent hits first, something sharp, fermented, and distinctly medieval. A mix of sweat, onions, and things better left unclassified. You've wandered into what passes for a clinic, a long wooden hall with beds made from straw and bad decisions. And everywhere, flies. They dart around lazily, clinging to rafters, perching on the rims of bowls, and occasionally buzzing into the ears of patients too weak to swat them. A healer waves them off with a branch, clearly losing the battle. You step carefully to avoid stepping on something moving. In the medieval world, houseflies were more than just annoying. They were suspected agents of divine judgment, disease, and in some cases, demonic influence. You know, casual stuff. Of course, nobody had microscopes back then, so germs were still a rumor. But flies were obvious, dirty, sneaky. They'd land on your food, then on your open wound, then on a corpse, and circle back for dessert, which is how they ended up both blamed and studied. You find a manuscript on a nearby table stained with something that might be blood or wine. Its writer tried to categorize fly behavior, how often they landed, where they preferred to hover, whether more flies meant a stronger illness. One page is titled, "Of Buzzing and Bad Humors." Delightful. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors actually believed flies caused illness or were just symptoms of it. Some saw them as warnings, others as tiny airborne messengers sent to carry disease from the unclean to the unfortunate. But here's where it gets weird. Some physicians used flies intentionally. Yes, you heard that right. There's a bizarre case recorded in 1342 involving a healer who believed that allowing flies to feed on infected wounds would carry away the poison, sort of like medieval Uber for pus. Of course, most patients didn't survive, but that may have been from the plague, not the flies, or both. You pause beside a cot where a patient lies with a cloth over their face and what looks like honey smeared on an arm wound. Flies buzz happily nearby. A small sign reads, "Do not swat, they are working." You back away slowly. Stranger still, flies occasionally played a role in diagnosis. If a certain type of fly ignored a wound, it might be blessed or clean. But if the flies gathered in great numbers, it was a sign of decay, infection, or punishment. And in a few wild cases, the pattern of fly landings was used to predict fate. Yes, medieval fly divination, because of course that was a thing. You stroll toward the open doors, swatting instinctively, even though none of them are following you. Yet. Outside, a group of children chases a donkey while giggling uncontrollably. You overhear one shout, "It's the Lord of Flies," and briefly wonder whether that was meant as a joke or a local title. Fun fact, some monasteries believed flies were attracted to sin. A friar with too many buzzing around him might be asked to confess more thoroughly. There are even records of monks attempting to exorcise flies from abbey kitchens using holy water and deeply concerned looks. In one dusty corner of your memory, you recall a modern theory. Flies actually were disease vectors. The medievals may have been wrong about the how, but right about the who. Accidentally brilliant in their deeply unwashed way. You pass a barrel filled with water, thick with buzzing wings and unfortunate insects who didn't make the landing. A young assistant sits beside it, sorting fly corpses by size. You ask why. She shrugs and says, "For the records?" That's somehow the most chilling thing so far. As you continue walking, your boots crunch over scattered straw. Behind you, a bell tolls faintly, likely for another patient lost. Ahead, a new aroma rises, sweet, clean, and silky. Yes, the air is about to shift. The buzzing fades, replaced by the gentle rustle of fabric. You're being drawn toward something finer, spun, and surprisingly gentle. It's silkworm time, baby. And you've never seen a bandage quite like this. The scent is faint but distinct. Mulberry leaves and warm dust. You follow it to a low stone building with an arched doorway, its walls humming faintly, as if the bricks themselves remember something soft. Inside, There is no candlelight, just shafts of sunlight filtering through narrow windows, illuminating what looks like a loom room, but it smells like a greenhouse. And then you hear it, the tiniest, most delicate munching sound, like 1,000 picky eaters nibbling on salad. You step closer to a series of shallow wooden trays stacked in tiers, and there they are, silkworms. Pale, plump, and slightly twitchy, they crawl slowly over beds of leaves, utterly unaware that their delicate threads are about to be woven into medical history. In medieval Europe, silk wasn't just for noble robes and overpriced curtains. It played a quiet but important role in healing. Physicians, especially in monasteries and courts, used silk threads, sometimes still coated in cocoon residue, as wound sutures. Why? Because silk was strong, smooth, and surprisingly sterile. Also, let's be honest, it made wounds feel fancy. You lift a square of folded cloth from a basket, surprised by how fine and light it is. It's not just silk. It's raw, almost sticky. This would have been applied directly to cuts or ulcers, especially those inflicted by divine punishment, which, historically, just meant anything unpleasant you didn't want to admit caused by bad hygiene. One monk's journal, painstakingly illustrated, bless his inky fingers, shows how silkworm cocoons were boiled and stretched, their threads wrapped gently around inflamed joints or sorrowful wounds of the spirit. Silk wasn't just medicinal, it was spiritual, a symbol of purity from a creature that literally ate leaves and pooped fabric. Miraculous. Historians still argue whether silk's true value was medicinal or symbolic. Some say its smooth texture reduced infection risk. Others claim it was more about status. If your wound was dressed in silk, your soul must be worth saving, or at least your family had money. You glance at a wall hanging, actually a woven chart, showing how silkworm growth stages corresponded to phases of the moon. A friar walks by and whispers, "Never trust silk gathered on a waning crescent." You nod, like that makes sense. Fun fact, in some regions, the unused parts of silkworm cocoons were powdered and added to salves. One recipe promised to restore harmony to the joints and soften a quarrelsome knee. You're not sure what that means, but you're definitely picturing an angry kneecap flipping a table. As you make your way out, you spot a curious sight. A knight sitting very still as a nun carefully wraps his sword arm with silk thread. He winces. She mutters something about, "Next time, don't joust before matins." You salute them both and back away before the knight starts crying. Outside, the warmth of the sun returns and the buzz of village life rises again. Silk may have been delicate, but its history isn't. It's tangled in trade routes, medical debates, and centuries of squishy insects given their all for that one glistening thread. You follow a winding path now toward the herb garden, but something else pulls at your curiosity. A low buzzing, not flies this time, louder, thicker, angrier. You squint toward a cluster of hives near the orchard wall, and your stomach does a little flip, because next on your journey through insect medicine is bees. Oh yes, the sting is coming. You take a cautious step toward the orchard wall, where the beehives hum like a tiny choir of irritated violas. The scent of wild flowers and wax hangs in the air, sweet but with a warning edge, like a grandmother who smiles just before smacking you with a wooden spoon. You slow your pace, instinctively ducking, as one ambitious bee zooms past your ear with all the drama of a medieval soprano. The hives are simple, dome-shaped skeps made of coiled straw, each one carefully propped up on stones. You notice a young woman kneeling nearby, her hands gloved in rough linen, her head draped in a veil. She hums softly as she works, gently smoking the entrance of a hive with a bundle of dried sage. "Keeps them calm," she murmurs, not looking up. "Most of the time." You don't get too close. In the world of medieval medicine, bees were little golden alchemists. Their honey was believed to have healing properties beyond the physical. It cleansed wounds, soothed sore throats, and in certain monasteries it was even used to preserve holy relics. That's right, saintly fingers marinated in honey. Someone's idea of blessed barbecue. You peer into a nearby basket where chunks of honeycomb glisten with golden syrup. One piece is labeled for cankerous lesions of the tongue. Suddenly, your own tongue feels a little weird. You walk away from the basket. Mainstream fact: honey was used as an antiseptic in battlefield wounds during the Crusades. It helped reduce infection, mostly because of its low moisture content and natural hydrogen peroxide. Soldiers didn't always know why it worked, but when your other option was moss bandages, you learned fast. The quirky bit? Some medieval remedies suggested combining honey with powdered emerald or unicorn horn. Yes, unicorn, which was either narwhal tusk or very expensive marketing. Either way, sparkly honey was considered elite-tier medicine. Historians still argue whether honey's sacred reputation made it seem more potent than it actually was. Was it the sugar that helped? The pH? Or was everyone just so tired of vinegar and leeches that honey felt like a vacation? You move toward a small wooden shelf beside the hives, where several jars of bee-related salves are carefully stored. One promises to summon clarity of mind and banish melancholy. Another is simply labeled Buzz Paste. You don't ask. A nearby scroll details the use of bee stings for arthritis. Yes, intentional stinging. The theory was that bee venom could draw blood to the joints, reducing pain. In some monasteries, older monks would allow a few bees to sting their knees before prayer. One particularly enthusiastic brother kept a personal hive and named the bees after the apostles. Peter was apparently the most reliable stinger. You'd take a seat on a stump and watch the bees working. Their rhythm is hypnotic. You notice how villagers come by to offer small prayers before collecting honey. For them, bees weren't just medical, they were divine. Tiny messengers between earth and heaven, swarming in the service of sweetness. Fun fact, one folk belief said that if you failed to tell the bees about a death in the family, they would stop making honey out of spite. Entire sermons were once given in front of hives just to keep them emotionally informed. A small child appears beside you, clutching a handful of dandelions. "They like these," she whispers, placing them gently near the hive. You nod solemnly. She then adds, "Sometimes they sting Dad when he lies." You blink. The bees buzz louder. A light breeze stirs the trees, and you feel the pull to move on. The path ahead twists downhill toward a place known only by its smell, herbal, smoky, and just a little crunchy. You remember something about dried ants being used in poultices. Your stomach clenches. Brace yourself. It's ant time. The path dips into a dusty hollow, shaded by knotty trees and the occasional buzzard circling overhead. No pressure. The air is dry here, and underfoot the dirt crunches with a sound that's probably just twigs, though your imagination insists it might be something with legs. A low hut squats at the edge of a clearing, surrounded by wooden bowls, mortar and pestle sets, and several mounds of what look suspiciously like ant hills. A woman in a thick apron stands at a table, calmly scooping tiny black bodies into a cloth sachet. She doesn't look up, only says, "You're late. The ants have been waiting." Charming. Ants, as it turns out, were deeply appreciated in certain corners of medieval medicine. They weren't glamorous like silkworms, nor did they carry the sweetness of bees, but they were available in massive quantities, highly organized, and always, always busy. That alone made them suspiciously magical in the eyes of medieval observers. The mainstream fact? Ants were sometimes crushed and mixed with vinegar or wine to form a paste for skin irritations, gout, or festering wounds. One particularly enduring recipe calls for thrice-boiled ant broth. Try saying that 3 times fast without gagging. You lean over one of the open bowls. Inside, dried ant bodies, tiny legs, curled antennae, and what appears to be a thorax stuck to a raisin. It smells earthy, a little nutty, and a lot like something you shouldn't get in your eyes. The woman offers you a jar of what she calls marching salve. Supposedly, it invigorates the limbs and sharpens the mind. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. It also makes you smell like forest floor. That's bonus. You take one step back. Here's where things veer into fringe territory. Some healers believed that ants contained fiery energies. One record describes the collection of red ants during summer solstice to harness solar vitality. These were placed under bed pillows to pull the fever from the bones. Whether it worked or just made sleeping a crunchy nightmare is anyone's guess. Historians still argue whether ant-based remedies had true medicinal merit or whether people were just throwing bugs at problems and hoping something stuck. After all, if the options are dried ants or a hole in your skull to drain bad thoughts, you might choose the insects too. Another curious belief that ants could sense disease. In a few accounts, people watched where ants clustered on a person's body and declared the afflicted part spoiled. You imagine someone waking up to ants on their foot and being told, "Ah, yes, your leg's cursed. Better drink this ant wine." Fun fact, some folk rituals included stepping barefoot over an ant trail to encourage circulation. One 14th century priest even claimed he could cure lethargy by sitting patients in an anthill for 10 minutes. Apparently, it worked, or at least got them running again. You peer into a basket labeled "Stinging Ants. Handle with courage." Inside, a few feisty red ones are still twitching. You choose not to handle them with anything. As you leave the hut, you notice a line of ants marching dutifully toward the orchard. You salute their tireless hustle. Say what you will about ants, but they understood teamwork centuries before office managers invented team-building retreats. The trail climbs again, leading you past fields of nettles, burdock, and something that might be moving. The shadows stretch long, and a cool wind ripples through the grass. You hear the distant rustle of paper wings, the soft clatter of delicate limbs. Up next, crickets, cicadas, and the nighttime medicine of song. The sun dips lower as you crest the next ridge, and the world shifts into something gentler. The air is cooler, touched with the scent of dry earth and crushed thyme underfoot. Somewhere close, just out of sight, 1,000 tiny musicians begin to tune up. Crickets, cicadas, little chirping metronomes of dusk. You pause, and the sound envelops you. It's rhythmic, almost hypnotic, like nature's ASMR. And in the medieval world, these sounds weren't just background noise. They were considered both omens and medicine. No joke. You could be diagnosed by a cricket, or at least serenaded by one while your toe was being amputated. You know, standard vibes. A wooden structure lies ahead, open on all sides like a rustic bandstand. You step closer and spot dozens of small cages and bowls, each holding a different chirping insect. A man in an oversized robe turns toward you, beaming. "Welcome to the concert," he says. "They perform nightly. Admission is itchy." He hands you a leaf. You don't ask why. In the medieval mind, sound had weight. Certain tones could heal, or so the belief went. Crickets, with their steady chirping, were used to lull patients into calm before surgery or prayer. There's even record of monks keeping cages of crickets in infirmaries, tiny bug-based lullabies. Who needs morphine when you've got musical legs. Mainstream fact: in some cultures, crickets were considered protectors against illness. Their constant chirping was believed to ward off evil spirits, or at least drown out your cousin Greg's snoring. And here's the quirky twist. One medieval French text describes a remedy for migraines involving a live cicada tied around the patient's wrist with red thread. The idea was that the insect's vibration would disrupt the storm in the skull. Or maybe it just made people too annoyed to think about the pain. Historians still argue whether the use of singing insects was truly medicinal or just early noise therapy with a bit of bug flair. Either way, if you've ever fallen asleep to crickets outside your window, you get it. You take a seat on a low stool as the bug chorus swells. A nearby woman is writing notes, actual notes, on parchment. She's charting the tempo and pitch, muttering phrases like soothing for melancholia and too sharp for gout. You inch away slowly, just in case you're next on her treatment list. One fun fact: a rare 13th century Italian tale features a cricket whose chirping is said to mend broken hearts. The trick was to keep it alive for 7 nights under a linen cloth while reciting poetry. Romance, medieval style, bugs and rhymes, and lots of superstition. A breeze stirs the grass, and you notice jars of dried insects hanging from the rafters. Apparently, crushed crickets were added to teas meant to soothe the nerves. One recipe includes ground chirper, rose petals, and honey, which sounds like a spa smoothie until you realize it's got legs in it. A boy approaches with a wooden flute, playing along with the chirping. He's not good, but the crickets politely keep tempo undeterred. You realize this whole scene, bugs, herbal smoke, distant bells, feels weirdly cozy. As the light fades, the chirping intensifies, then softens into a steady lull. Your body wants to rest, but your curiosity pulls you forward. Beyond the grove lies a row of stone huts with thick wooden doors. From within, something sharp and vinegary cuts through the air. You've smelled this before. It's sharp, medicinal, slightly offensive. It's vinegar flies and maggot therapy time. Because yes, this was a real thing. Brace yourself, brave wanderer. The squirmy part of history awaits. The scent hits you like a punch from a well-meaning herbalist. Strong vinegar, crushed garlic, and a faint whiff of damp linen. You wrinkle your nose, then immediately regret inhaling through it. The stone huts ahead look innocent enough, but the wooden signs hanging on their doors tell a different story. One reads, "Purgation in progress." Another simply says, "Buzz gently." You approach the nearest one and peer inside. A long table, scrubbed but stained, stretches along the center of the room. Atop it lie several ceramic bowls covered with fine mesh. Inside the bowls, larvae, dozens of wriggling, creamy white maggots, each one going about its work with surprising enthusiasm. A man in a brown apron stands nearby, carefully nudging a spoonful of them onto a strip of cloth soaked in vinegar. "Don't worry," he says, not even turning around. "They only eat the bad parts." Comforting. Believe it or not, medieval physicians used maggots as a legitimate medical treatment. The mainstream historical fact is that certain types of fly larvae, particularly those of the Lucilia sericata, aka the green bottle fly, were known to consume dead flesh while leaving healthy tissue untouched. This made them surprisingly effective for cleaning infected wounds, especially in battle injuries or festering sores. You watch as the man lifts a bandaged leg and gently applies the maggot wrap. The patient winces, but doesn't protest. "Better than amputation," the man mutters. "Most days." The maggots get to work, squirming with purpose. It's equal parts fascinating and horrifying. Here's the quirky detail. Some healers claim that maggots sang to the flesh. A soft clicking or humming noise was interpreted as a sign that they were content and working. Patients were sometimes instructed to listen for the music of healing, which sounds like medieval marketing genius, honestly. Historians still argue whether maggot therapy was a widespread practice or more of a fringe remedy preserved in monastic enclaves and battlefield journals. What's certain is that some wounds treated with maggots healed better than those treated with knives and prayers alone. On a nearby shelf, you spot labeled jars, fly hatchlings, spring batch, vinegar cloth, mild, and, alarmingly, experimental cheese infusion. You do not open that one. A younger apprentice nervously fans the flies near a warm hearth, murmuring a prayer to Saint Erasmus, patron saint of bodily functions and guts. You smile politely and step away from anything buzzing. And then, the really odd moment, a scroll nailed to the wall listing behavioral changes during maggot treatment. Items include increased dreams, urge to hum, and a desire to name the larvae. Apparently, one knight insisted his maggots be called the Little Chewers. He claimed they whispered tactical advice. You walk outside, needing air, but your mind still churns. Maggot medicine, insect lullabies, bee sting arthritis. This world is full of contradictions, so earthy and raw, yet oddly tender in its approach to care. Ahead, another scent lingers in the breeze, warmer this time, like cloves and cedar. You follow it, grateful for the shift, and find a small circle of stools around a brazier. A woman stirs a pot of something thick and brown. She grins. "It's beetle balm. Want a dab?" You hesitate, but curiosity wins again, because next comes the crunchiest treatment of them all, beetles and blistering bugs. You dip your fingers into the thick, glistening paste and immediately regret it. It's warm, too warm, and smells like roasted chestnuts mixed with regret. The woman smiles. "Don't worry, it only causes mild blistering. That means it's working." You freeze, trying to decide if you should scrape it off with a stick or just casually rub it on your enemy. The pot of beetle balm simmers behind her, a chunky mixture of herbs, wax, and, yes, ground beetles, specifically cantharidin beetles. If the name doesn't ring a bell, maybe their other title will: blister beetles. These little guys secrete a chemical so potent medieval physicians used it to raise blisters on the skin on purpose. Why? Because when you don't understand infections, your go-to logic is, let's make it worse before it gets better. Mainstream historical fact: cantharidin, extracted from blister beetles, was used in the Middle Ages to create controlled skin blisters. The belief was that illness could be drawn out through the skin, and the more dramatic the boil, the more successful the treatment. It was especially popular for treating fevers, plague swellings, and even, weirdly, heartbreak. Yes, love blisters. You heard that right. You watch another patient recline on a straw mat nearby, his arms wrapped in linen poultices, cheeks blotchy with red welts. "It stings like the devil," he mutters cheerfully, "but my headache's gone." You nod supportively, then slowly back away from the balm. The quirky fact? Some nobles carried vials of cantharidin not for healing, but for romance. A few drops on the skin flushed cheeks, puffed lips, and gave the appearance of passionate health. In the worst cases, it was even used as a questionable love potion. We do not recommend this for date night. Historians still argue whether cantharidin's widespread use was based on actual results, or simply the popularity of visible, dramatic reactions. After all, nothing says, "Trust me, I'm a healer," like someone erupting into medieval hives. You wipe your fingers on a fern, just in case. There's a wooden rack beside the fire with dried beetles pinned like macabre jewelry. The woman gestures to them. "Each has a different heat," she says. "This one's mild. That one will open your third eye and maybe your elbows." You stare at her. She's completely serious. Nearby, a stack of scrolls outlines beetle-based recipes, ranging from balms to broths to things politely labeled "not for internal use." One note mentions a beetle and ash salve used by archers to numb their fingertips. You consider medieval archery suddenly much more hardcore. Then there's the traveling healer who supposedly made a fortune selling beetle powder at fairs. His pitch? A blister today, a cure tomorrow. He was run out of town 3 times, which in medieval terms means he was wildly successful. As the sun dips behind the hills, the woman tosses herbs into the brazier, and the smoke curls into the twilight. She hums an old tune, something half lullaby, half prayer. You're starting to understand the rhythm of this strange bug-filled world. Pain, patience, potions, and a whole lot of crawling things. Just as you begin to relax, she mentions casually, "You'll want to avoid the next hill after dark. That's where they keep the centipedes." You blink. She adds, "Don't worry, most are asleep, probably." A few fireflies flicker in the shadows as you head toward the ridge. The air is thicker now, the path soft underfoot, like moss, or something moving just under it. Up next, long legs, too many segments, and the most misunderstood insects in medieval medicine. Yes, it's centipede time. The path narrows, winding through underbrush that looks like it's been politely avoided by every sane traveler for miles. Twigs snap under your boots, and something slithers away just beyond the torchlight. You don't follow it. You're not that curious. A wooden sign appears, nailed to a leaning post. Faded letters read, "Healers of Hidden Limbs." You really hope that's not literal. You round a bend and spot them. Jars, so many jars. Dozens of them, all arranged on crooked shelves outside a mossy stone hut. Some glow faintly, others ripple with motion. Inside each one, centipedes, long, squirming, multi-legged little nightmares that make even the bravest squirrel backflip away in terror. A thin man steps out from the hut, holding a jar, the way a sommelier might hold an aged wine. "Beautiful, aren't they?" he asks. You nod because disagreeing with a man who cuddles centipedes is not on tonight's agenda. Centipedes were the unsung anti-heroes of medieval medicine. Mainstream fact, dried or powdered centipede was believed to be effective in treating infections, fevers, and even seizures. The logic? Centipedes are poisonous, so they must be extra good at fighting other poisons. Makes sense. In the same way that eating charcoal after bad clams seems logical, until it's not. One recipe from the 14th century reads, "Take one centipede, roast it until blackened, grind to dust, and mix with wine. Administer with prayer." Yes, a burnt bug smoothie and a Hail Mary. You examine a jar marked Fever Benders. Inside, a particularly chonky centipede tap dances across the glass. The man explains that this breed was thought to pull the heat from the body when applied to the wrists. Some patients were wrapped in linens soaked in centipede oil and left to sweat it out. Because clearly what you want during a high fever is bug juice and claustrophobia. Quirky fact? One fringe healer swore by live centipede necklaces. She claimed they aligned the humors and improved balance. You imagine trying yoga with a crawling chain around your neck and decide balance is overrated. Historians still argue whether centipede treatments were genuinely therapeutic or simply acts of desperation in pest-ridden towns. Some records suggest it was a fear-based practice. If something looks terrifying, maybe it terrifies illness too. In one old village tale, a woman fed her husband centipede tonic to cure his cough. He stopped coughing, but started whistling in his sleep. She blamed the legs. As you watch, the jarred centipedes begin to still. The man covers them gently, whispering, They rest before midnight, just like the illness they chase. You back away slowly, your spine twitching like it remembers every leg in every jar. The trees thin ahead. A lantern sways on a crooked post, casting warm light over bundles of herbs and soft mossy stools. You smell beeswax, warm milk, and something that reminds you of linen dried in sunlight. It's oddly comforting. You've reached the part of the night where we talk about the weirdly wholesome insects of medieval medicine, lacewings, ladybugs, and the tiny bugs believed to carry dreams. Prepare for fewer legs and slightly more charm. The night air shifts. No more vinegar, no more venom, just a gentle floral hush, the kind of quiet that makes you whisper without knowing why. You pass beneath an arch woven from dried lavender and rosemary, strung with tiny bells that jingle like fairies bumping into each other. You step into a clearing ringed with soft moss and candlelight. It smells like a garden in a storybook. A few wooden benches sit around a low fire where a woman with silver hair stirs a pot of honey and herbs. She smiles. "Not all healing bites," she says. "Some of it glows." She lifts the lid from a glass terrarium and you lean in. Inside, lace wings. Delicate, translucent creatures that float more than fly, wings like sponge sugar catching the firelight. She dips a feather into a bowl of crushed lacewing wings and begins brushing it across a strip of linen. "For sleep," she murmurs, "and protection." Mainstream historical fact. In several parts of medieval Europe, lacewings were believed to carry a natural, calming agent, both literally and symbolically. Their presence near a sickbed was seen as a sign of recovery, and crushed wings were sometimes added to balms and sleep sachets, especially for children. But the truly quirky bit? Some households believed lacewings could catch bad dreams. Not unlike proto-dream catchers, bowls filled with lacewings and soft herbs were placed beneath beds. The insect's fragile presence was said to trap fear in their wings, releasing it only with the morning sun. Whether this worked or not is, let's say, unproven. But people slept better, and sometimes that's all medicine needs to do. Historians still argue whether these gentle uses were symbolic or rooted in some actual observation. Lacewings do eat mites and aphids, after all. Maybe people just noticed their absence improved things. Or maybe, like now, a bit of belief goes a long way at bedtime. You glance around. Small bundles of herbs hang from the trees, each tied with a ribbon and an insect charm. Ladybug for love, cricket for patience, firefly for clarity. The woman explains that travelers would collect these tokens and leave them under their pillows when they reached home. The bugs? Sometimes real, sometimes just carved from wood. Either way, it was the ritual that mattered. She hands you a cloth pouch that smells like mint and chamomile. "For the road," she says. "No centipedes. Promise." You relax a little. A boy nearby is reading a scroll by lantern light. You squint. It's a list of bedtime chants. One involves softly repeating the Latin name for the ladybug while holding your breath. You try it. You immediately cough. Fun fact, ladybugs were often associated with healing prayers. In some regions, their arrival in spring was taken as a sign that disease would retreat. People even believed that if a ladybug crawled across your skin, it was measuring your illness. No pressure, little bug. You lie back on the moss and look up at the stars, a lacewing drifting past your cheek. The woman adds one last scoop of honey to the pot, and the scent rises. Sweet, earthy, warm. But just before you doze off completely, someone stumbles into the clearing, clutching a scroll. "Urgent remedy required," they shout. "The leech barrel has tipped." You sit up. Did they say leech? Yup. Time to meet the most famous medieval medical insects of them all, the wriggly, squishy, blood-slurping legends. There's a reason the word leech survives today, clinging awkwardly to metaphors like a bad house guest. And tonight, you're about to find out why. You follow the commotion toward a wooden hut marked with a simple but deeply alarming sign: licensed bloodletting and related squelch. Outside, several people are on their knees, scrambling to collect what appears to be, yes, escaped leeches, wriggling in the grass like tiny, disgruntled sausages. One helper holds a bucket with what looks like half a dozen of them inside. "We lost the fat one," he mutters, "the one named Jeffrey." You don't ask follow-up questions. Leeches were the celebrities of medieval medicine. Mainstream historical fact, bloodletting was one of the most common treatments for almost every ailment in the Middle Ages, from headaches and fevers to epilepsy and melancholy. And though doctors sometimes used knives or lancets, leeches were often the preferred method because they were gentler, tidier, less likely to complain. A professional leech handler waves you inside. The air is humid and smells like iron, river mud, and regret. In the center of the room sits a large wooden barrel lined with moss, filled with water, and dozens of fat, glistening leeches, all bobbing around like little inflatable horrors. You're handed a shallow clay dish and told to choose a calm one. You don't know what that means. Now, here's the quirky twist. Not all leeches were created equal. Medieval physicians had a ranking system. Some believed that leeches collected on feast days were more potent. Others insisted that river-fed leeches were nobler than swamp-born ones. One London apothecary in the 14th century swore that leeches that had heard church bells sucked with more reverence. Sure, historians still argue whether leeches actually improved outcomes, or whether their continued use was more about ritual, tradition, and the deeply human urge to do something when someone was sick. At least the patient looked paler, so maybe the treatment felt successful. You watch a man recline on a wooden bench while two leeches go to work on his forearm. He's sipping broth and chatting with a monk about local beet prices. Apparently, this is just a Thursday. A chalkboard lists today's available leech packages, including the Elbow Quartet, Sinus Reset, and, disturbingly, full medieval detox requires fasting. You're shown a scroll of medical diagrams, all featuring shockingly cheerful drawings of leeches mid-suck. One corner has a tiny note: "Always thank your leech. Gratitude improves circulation." Probably not scientifically tested. In the back room, a woman catalogs leech behavior with the intensity of a matchmaker. This one responds to harp music. This one's shy. That one, a biter. You assume they're all biters, but keep that to yourself. At some point, you're offered the chance to meet the leech matriarch. You politely decline and back away toward the door, trying not to step on any escapees. You wish Jeffrey the best wherever he's gone. Outside, the moon glows high, and the air smells fresher again. Cool grass, ash from distant hearths, a hint of rosemary carried on the wind. You've seen the bugs that burrow, bite, and blister. You've seen the ones used in strange rituals and soothing dreams. Now, as you reach the edge of a misty field, it's time to meet the creatures who weren't just medicine, but warning signs. Nature's prophets, disease detectors. The insects medieval folks believed knew when illness was coming. Mist rolls low across the field, curling around your ankles like a cautious cat. Crickets chirp somewhere to your left, frogs croak like drunk philosophers to your right, and overhead, an owl decides now's the time to be very judgmental. You've just crossed into the world of insect omens, where bugs weren't healers or ingredients, but messengers. In a time before thermometers, microscopes, or Dr. Google, medieval folk looked to nature for signs. And insects, ubiquitous, twitchy, and delightfully weird, were some of the earliest predictors of sickness. Mainstream historical fact: during outbreaks of the Black Death and other plagues, people noticed certain insect patterns, like sudden swarms of flies or vanishing bees, often came just before illness arrived. From this, they developed what you might call the medieval bug weather forecast. If it buzzes oddly, start digging your fever trench. You walk between rows of wooden markers painted with different insects, flies, bees, locusts, even ants, all carved with symbols and prayers. A young woman with a hawthorn crown stands at the center, holding a brass bowl filled with molasses. She explains, "If the flies ignore it, we stay. If they swarm it, we flee." Practical? Maybe. A little sticky? Definitely. And here's your quirky fact. In some Italian towns, people believed a certain kind of fly, small, red-eyed, fond of bread, was a plague harbinger. They even had a name for it, the baker's doom. If it appeared at your window, you'd light incense, ring a bell, and throw salted flour out the door. You know, just normal pest control things. Historians still argue whether these insect observations were proto-epidemiology or just desperate pattern-making in an unpredictable world. Probably a bit of both. After all, if a cloud of mosquitoes descends and your neighbor starts coughing, it doesn't take long to assume the bugs brought more than bites. One elderly monk reportedly kept detailed fly logs, not fly fishing logs, just straight-up entries about where flies gathered, how they flew, what they landed on. He swore that the angle of a fly's wing predicted fevers. Others thought bees grew sluggish just before a plague wave, and some claimed crickets refused to chirp near deathbeds. You pause beside a wooden cage filled with locusts. A boy feeds them bits of dried fig while humming. "They tell me when to shut the gates," he says with a shrug. Okay. Nearby, a wall is covered in woven insect motifs. Beetles, mantises, butterflies, all stitched into linen with dyed thread. Beneath them, bundles of dried herbs and bundles of dried things. Hard to tell. You don't ask. A local tale is shared as you sip warm barley tea beside the hearth. It goes like this. When the lice in the Lord's castle grew restless, the servant said a sickness was on its way. If they bit at night, fevers would come by dawn. If they vanished altogether, too late. You swallow your tea slower after that. As the evening deepens, fireflies appear, dotting the mist like stars that got bored of the sky. One old woman chases them into a jar and ties a ribbon around the lid. If they flicker 3 times, you're safe, she explains. 4, wash your hands and stay inside. Honestly, not terrible advice. You make your way across the field, your shoes damp with dew, and your mind buzzing with thoughts of prophetic fleas and weather forecasting caterpillars. Up ahead, a crooked cottage leans against a walnut tree. The door creaks open, and a man in a soot-streaked apron waves you inside. "Come," he says with a grin, "let me show you the bug that saved my mother's life." It glowed. Glowing bugs? We're doing this. The door closes behind you with a soft clunk, sealing you into a workshop that smells like ash, beeswax, and the faint tingle of something electric. You squint through the dim light, and then you see them. Fireflies, hundreds of them, in glass jars, in wooden cages, in wire lanterns. Some flicker lazily, others blink in quick Morse code patterns that probably translate to "Get me out of here." The man in the soot-streaked apron chuckles and adjusts a knob on a contraption that resembles a wine rack married to a birdcage. "Don't worry," he says. "They like it here. I feed them apple peel and praise." You don't know whether to be reassured or worried. Mainstream historical fact: in several medieval regions, especially in southern Europe and the Near East, fireflies were used not only as light sources, but in certain folk healing practices. The soft glow of these beetles was associated with purity, warding off spirits, and even recovery from illness. In villages without candles or oil to spare, fireflies illuminated sick rooms. Practical, yes. Beautiful, also yes. Slightly unsettling, definitely. You sit beside a jar filled with warm straw and two particularly glowy bugs. The man calls them my candle twins. He explains how, during a regional fever outbreak, he placed fireflies around his mother's bed. After noticing that rooms lit with fireflies seemed to breathe easier. Did she recover because of the beetles, or because she finally got some peace and quiet without oil smoke in the air? Hard to say. Here's your quirky detail. In some Slavic regions, fireflies were believed to collect bad air. People thought their glow came from absorbing illness from the environment, like six-legged air purifiers. One practice involved trapping a firefly in a small cage and hanging it around the neck to draw the heat from a feverish body. Yes, medieval people basically invented the bug-powered wearable tech. Historians still argue whether firefly healing was metaphorical, ritualistic, or an early form of luminotherapy. After all, humans do love to put hope in shiny things, and a soft golden blink does feel more soothing than, say, a knife to the forehead. You lean closer to the jars and notice a small altar set up in the corner, wax figurines of beetles, polished stones, and bundles of wildflowers. The man explains that on solstice nights, people used to write illnesses on scraps of parchment, whisper them to the fireflies, then release the bugs into the night. "Let the stars carry your pain," he recites softly. You don't know if it worked, but it's kind of poetic. He hands you a tiny lantern containing just one firefly, glowing faintly like a sleepy pilot light. "You'll need this for the next part," he says. "They don't like the dark where we're going." And he means that quite literally. You follow a narrow trail out of the cottage and into a grove where the air grows thick and the ground squelches slightly underfoot. A soft, droning hum begins to build in the distance, low, constant, and oddly rhythmic. You've entered the buzzing belly of medieval pest control. Next up, the flying mercenaries of the medicine world, flies, gnats, and midges, sent not to heal, but to hunt disease, or at least annoy it into submission. You inch forward, your feet sinking just a bit into the damp, springy moss that carpets the grove. The buzzing grows louder, less of a hum now, more of a conversation you're not invited to. Your firefly lantern flickers nervously in your hand, like it too has heard stories about this place. You duck beneath a branch and emerge into a strange open-air workshop. Swarms of insects hover in neat lines between tall wooden posts, each post adorned with flowers, rotten fruit, and, in one case, what looks suspiciously like a ham. People in smocks scurry about, adjusting things with long spoons and what might be incense wands. A boy runs past yelling, "The midges prefer mint. Get the mint." mainstream historical fact. Believe it or not, medieval physicians did sometimes use flies and other flying insects in a kind of primitive pest therapy. The idea was simple. If you could draw bugs to certain places, you might be able to steer them away from others, namely the sick room. Smelly bait was hung in public squares or outside city gates to lure disease-carrying insects elsewhere. In short, it was less exterminate the pests and more give the pests a tastier option. A woman with bug net sleeves greets you and offers a spoonful of fermented honey water. For the nerves, she says. It does not help the nerves. She leads you to a corner where gnats swirl above a bowl of goose fat. Observe, she says dramatically. These are the fever chasers. According to her, people once believed certain insects were drawn to heat caused by disease, and that if you watched where they gathered, you could find the next outbreak before it started. Quirky tidbit. In 13th century Armenia, there were reports of sickness sentries, villagers who monitored fly patterns like weather vanes. If flies ignored the latrines but clustered around the church doors, you were supposed to hold your breath and walk backward home. Don't worry, nobody understands that either. Historians still argue whether these methods had any real effect, or whether they were just early attempts at quarantine theater. Still, it's fascinating to think they may have stumbled upon environmental tracking without realizing it. Insects really do react to chemical changes in their surroundings, even if church flies wasn't the breakthrough science was waiting for. You're shown a fly-attracting wheel, a kind of carousel bait trap, where bits of old meat, onions, and herbs are pinned to spinning spokes. We rotate this daily, says a girl, as a fly does a loop-de-loop past your nose. That way, they don't get bored. You want to ask what happens if the bugs do get bored, but honestly, you're not ready for the answer. Nearby, a young apprentice draws fly trails in the dirt with a stick, trying to interpret what they call the spiral sign. If they fly in a clockwise loop, she says seriously, it means you should avoid lentils for 3 days. Noted. Behind a curtain of dangling garlic cloves, you find a wall of scrolls documenting insect activity during the Great Famine. When the fruit flies left the monastery cellars, one entry reads, the monks wept. They knew it meant the mold had won. Mold, 1. Monks, 0. You sip more honey water, feeling the buzz both inside and out. The air is heavy with pheromones, theories, and just a hint of damp wool. It's chaotic, it's bizarre, it's kind of brilliant. These weren't silly superstitions, they were survival strategies, cobbled together from observation and hope, and occasionally goose fat. But now, as the insect symphony fades and your lantern's glow steadies again, you're beckoned to the edge of the grove. A stone path winds down into a cold, dark cellar where one final chapter of this itchy epic awaits, the records. Because somewhere, someone had to write all this down, the cures, the myths, the bugs with names like Freckle Whisperer and Spleen Helper. Welcome to the insect archives. Your feet echo on damp stone steps as you descend into the cellar, the cool air hugging your arms like a polite ghost. The firefly in your lantern flickers once, then settles into a gentle pulse, like it knows secrets are stored down here. You duck beneath an arched doorway and find yourself in a narrow hall lined with shelves, scrolls, and sealed clay jars. Welcome to the insect archives, arguably the most underrated corner of medieval medical history. You know, assuming you rate historical insectology on a regular basis, which you now do. A bent old man wearing a hat made of bark, unclear whether that's medical or just fashion, gestures for silence and leads you in with a finger to his lips. He doesn't speak, but hands you a scroll labeled Beetles and Bilious Temperaments. It's thorough. Mainstream historical fact. Monasteries and apothecaries across Europe recorded folk remedies involving insects, sometimes blending them with religious or humoral theories. These texts catalog the use of ants for digestive issues, lice as indicators of spiritual imbalance, and spiders, yes, spiders, as migraine treatments. The logic was, if it has legs and moves, it probably cures something. It's not that different from modern multivitamins, honestly. You unroll a parchment titled 16 Uses for the Humble Earwig. Spoiler, none of them make sense. Still, the scribe had amazing handwriting. Here's a quirky tidbit. One monk in 14th century Burgundy compiled a glossary of insect-based sayings, including, "When fleas dance early, the bones shall ache late," and "Trust not the beetle who walks west." Was he a naturalist? A poet? A guy with too much time during plague lockdown? All of the above. Historians still argue whether these records were meant as serious instruction or satirical commentary. Some believe scribes were dead serious. Others think monks were just bored, cheeky, and maybe slightly high on incense fumes. But many of these insect notations reappear in different regions and languages, suggesting some level of respected transmission. You open a dusty ledger containing diagrams of insect wings labeled with ailments: moth, insomnia; wasp, anger of the spleen; cicada, haunting thoughts. One corner reads, "Don't trust blue beetles on a Tuesday." Okay, then. A flickering torch reveals glass jars embedded in the stone wall, each holding what appears to be preserved insects. One fat fly frozen mid-gape. A centipede doing its best yoga pose. A beetle with a suspicious number of legs. Some are labeled. Most are not. One is simply marked, "Don't." You pass a table with dried lavender and crushed thistle, where someone once attempted to classify insect mood by odor preference. Smells of onion equal melancholy. Smells of apples ill hopeful. Smells of feet is suspicious. There are footnotes, but you don't want to read them. In one dark alcove, you find what might be the first ever bug-based cookbook. Beetle broths, fly infusions, and a delicacy called maggot milk pudding. Don't ask? Really, don't. But it's not all strange. Some entries are heartbreakingly human. Notes scrawled in margins like, "Tried this on my brother. He laughed again," or "Fly salve calmed her crying." You imagine someone desperate, clinging to the hope that these tiny creatures held healing powers, simply because nothing else did. You feel a reverence here, among the oddments and dust, a sense that even the smallest lives were studied, used, respected, that maybe, just maybe, an earwig really did ease someone's pain, or at least distracted them from it. The bark-hatted man returns offering a beeswax candle molded into the shape of a stag beetle, a gift, a warning. You nod politely. As you turn to go, he points to one final scroll tucked behind a cracked bowl of dried cicadas. It reads, "The singing cures." Music? Vibration? You're not sure yet, but something tells you the next room hums with more than just stories. The candlelight dances across the stone walls as you clutch the beetle-shaped wax in one hand and push open the wooden door into the next room. The air here thrums, not loudly, but there's a definite, almost musical vibration that seems to press gently against your temples. It's like the world is exhaling, in harmony. You step into a chamber strung with fine silk threads, crisscrossing the ceiling like an overworked harp. Hanging from them, tiny bells, hollow reeds, and at least one insect-sized lyre. Yes, lyre. Someone built a harp small enough for a grasshopper's midlife crisis. Welcome to the world of the singing cures. Mainstream historical fact. During the medieval period, some healers believed that sound could influence the body's balance of humors, particularly when those sounds came from nature. And insects, with their constant chirps, buzzes, and clicks, were seen as natural tuning forks for the soul. In some cases, patients were prescribed exposure to specific insect sounds, especially crickets or cicadas, to calm anxiety, headaches, or night terrors. As you take a seat on a low stool woven from willow branches, a woman in a veil begins tapping a polished stone in rhythm. The strings above you start to shimmer subtly. Around the room, various jars hold live crickets, each chirping in staggered tempo, like someone started a bug jazz band and forgot to tell the humans. A young apprentice places a tiny conical hat on a beetle and gently nudges it onto a drum made from stretched onion skin. You blink slowly. The beetle taps once, then twice, then just kind of stands there like a percussive diva refusing to perform without snacks. Here's a quirky tidbit. In 12th century Persia, patients with melancholic vapors were advised to listen to the 7 chirps of the twilight cricket, preferably while lying in a warm clay bath. And yes, there were people whose entire job was to locate the proper crickets and bring them to the bathhouse in little woven baskets. That's right, medieval cricket DJs. Historians still argue whether the curative power came from the insects' sounds themselves or simply from the calming ritual of listening. Either way, the crickets got top billing. In some monasteries, crickets were kept not in cages, but in carved wooden homes, passed down like relics. Their chirping was considered sacred during nighttime meditation. You run your fingers over a scroll that records famous insect songs and the ailments they were said to ease. There's the beetle waltz for swollen joints, the moth dirge for sleeplessness, and something ominously called the wasp fandango, which we're just going to pretend never existed. In one corner, a set of clay bowls vibrate slightly, each containing a different bug: beetles, ants, a confused mayfly. The vibrations are carefully recorded by a monk sitting cross-legged with charcoal and parchment. "I study the frequency of peace," he whispers without breaking eye contact. A girl hands you what looks like a flute carved from elder wood. "Try this," she says. "It mimics the cicada's third note. It's good for tension headaches." You blow softly, and the room falls eerily quiet, then bursts into approving chirps. Did you just earn a standing ovation from insects? You chuckle, then remember the rule: 3 light jokes per section. Right. So here's one. What do you call a beetle that plays soothing music? A relax-a-doodle bug. You're welcome. And here's another. How many monks does it take to tune a grasshopper? None. It tunes itself, then leaves you for someone who appreciates art. Anyway, the woman in the veil leads you to a final curtain, drawn tight with a clasp shaped like a dragonfly. Beyond this, she says, is the room of final breath. Not as grim as it sounds. It's where the dying were brought to hear the insect choirs, to be soothed, not saved. You pause, holding the beetle candle close. The sounds grow softer now, crickets fading, wings brushing silk, a faint hum like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. You're about to step through. The curtain pulls back with a sigh, and you step into a chamber that feels like the very belly of quiet. Not silence. There's still that subtle hum, like the memory of a song, but it's quieter than any place you've ever been. You get the sense that if you whispered, even your thoughts would echo. This is the room of final breath. It's round, stone-walled, and lit by dozens of tiny jars glowing softly, some with candlelight, some with what you now recognize as your old friends, fireflies, crickets, and yes, one rather majestic moth sitting smugly on the rim of a wax bowl like it owns the place. It probably does. Mainstream historical fact: in certain medieval infirmaries, especially in northern Italy and parts of France, rooms were deliberately constructed to be filled with low ambient sounds, often produced by natural elements like wind chimes, water droplets, and yes, insects. These were believed to help the sick either recover or pass peacefully. It was a kind of proto-hospice philosophy. If the body can't heal, soothe the spirit. In the center lies a stone slab, not grim but ceremonial. Surrounding it are woven mats and low cushions. The air smells faintly of lavender, wax, and something warm and nutty, probably chamomile or the medieval equivalent of sleepy tea. A gentle caretaker greets you with a nod, no words, just a gesture to sit, observe, and listen. She pours something into a shallow dish near a hive-shaped cage. A faint buzzing begins. Bees, but tiny ones, bred specifically to hum at a comforting pitch. You didn't even know that was a thing. Neither did medieval folks, probably, but they certainly tried. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, bees were thought to carry messages to the beyond. When someone died, the family would tell the bees by tapping the hive and announcing the death aloud. In one 14th century record, a healer supposedly placed dying patients near beehives so their last breath could ride the hum skyward. Is it true? Maybe. Is it beautiful? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether these death songs were rooted in pagan ritual, early Christian mysticism, or just communal compassion. Some believe it was all symbolic. Others point to rare texts describing specific insect recipes for peaceful deathbeds, like combining crickets, beeswax, and pine needles to create a soothing soundscape. One text simply says, "Let the beetle sing when the lungs grow tired." You close your eyes for a moment and just breathe. There's a rhythm to the place, like the crickets outside, the pulse of wings, the rise and fall of quiet breath. It doesn't feel like death here. It feels like hush, like exhale, like release. A small boy enters the room and places a ladybug on a folded scrap of cloth. "For safe travels," he says, barely audible. The bug scuttles a bit, then rests. The boy bows and leaves. You watch as one of the attendants lifts a bowl of warmed honey near a cluster of sleeping bees. "The scent makes them hum," she whispers, "just for a while." She's right. Soon a low, velvety vibration fills the room like an invisible blanket, not loud, just there. It makes you want to curl up and nap forever, honestly. You glance around and realize the room isn't just for the dying. It's for anyone nearing the end of something: pain, panic, heartbreak, illness. In a time before morphine or playlists or decent pillows, this was a final comfort. It didn't cure. It accompanied. A nearby scroll reads, "To leave the world in company of small things is to be reminded that no ending is ever alone." You exhale deeply. The candle in your hand has burned low. The beetle's back has melted into a wax puddle, soft and glistening. And then a bell chimes softly, clear, high, and kind. It's time to rise. Beyond this room, they say, lies the garden. The last stop. The place where bugs aren't tools or symbols anymore. Just bugs, doing their weird, wiggly things in peace. You feel ready. You step beyond the room of final breath and into the garden. But this is no tidy courtyard of roses and saints. No, this is a tangled, humming, sun-dappled wild patch, half overgrown, half lovingly chaotic. Vines sprawl where they please. Mushrooms cluster like gossiping old women under logs. Beetles scurry between mossy stones like they're late to an appointment they forgot they scheduled. And above it all, insects, dancing, hovering, living. The air is warmer here with that golden kind of stillness you only find just after a rain or just before a really satisfying nap. The sunlight filters through leaves and wings alike, casting slow-moving shadows on the grass. A gardener waves from a distance, too polite to interrupt your very dramatic walk of reflection. He's busy coaxing a praying mantis off a tomato plant with a stick shaped like a flute. No one mentions it. It's just part of the job. Mainstream historical fact. Monastery gardens in the Middle Ages were not just for herbs and vegetables. They often included insectariums, or wild patches deliberately left untamed, because some monks believed that insects could teach patience, humility, and healing. Gardens weren't just places of food, they were spaces of recovery, observation, and sometimes quiet worship. You pass a low stone wall covered in ivy. On it, small tiles are etched with drawings, dragonflies beside wounded knights, fleas with tiny halos, bees hovering over sleeping patients. This is a place that remembers, not glorifies, but remembers the roles these tiny creatures played in healing. Quirky tidbit. 115 the century English abbey held a Day of the Small Saints, where insects were symbolically blessed for their service to humankind. A snail once received a garland of violets. A bumblebee got gently spritzed with rosewater, as one does. Historians still argue whether these traditions were theological, medical, or just adorable. Some claim they were metaphors for divine care, that if even a gnat had purpose, so did every life. Others suspect it was just an excuse to throw a spring picnic with extremely delicate guests. As you stroll deeper into the garden, you spot a carved bench shaped like a curled millipede. It looks uncomfortable. You sit anyway. Nearby, a group of children is gathering snails and arranging them in careful spirals. One whispers, "This one cured my uncle's hiccups." You choose not to question it. If snail spirals and bug choirs got people through centuries of plague, panic, and heartbreak, then honestly, let them have it. An elder is pruning a bush with scissors shaped like dragonfly wings. She hums an off-key tune that the bees seem to follow. "This bush treats coughs," she says, "or makes great tea, or both. No one's sure anymore." You ask if the insects are still used for healing. She laughs. "No need, but we thank them anyway." She gestures around. "They taught us to watch closer, to listen better, and sometimes just to wait." That's what this garden is, a monument not to cures that worked, but to care that tried. A soft, buzzing echo of a world where people looked to the smallest things and whispered, "Help!" You follow a winding path that loops around a pond. Water striders dance across the surface like figure skaters in a silent contest. A frog blinks in slow motion. Somewhere above, cicadas begin their long, sleepy chant. You reach the end of the path where a small wooden gate stands open. Beyond it, dusk. The garden fades into a twilight glade filled with fireflies. They blink lazily in the air like forgetful stars. The hum is quieter now. Not gone, just settled. You pause at the gate and take one last breath of the insect air, sweet, earthy, oddly calming. You've followed the crawl of history, the sting of strange remedies, and the buzz of centuries-long curiosity. And here, where no one's trying to trap or label or grind a beetle into powder, it all makes a quiet kind of sense. Tiny things made big efforts. Humans noticed. And somewhere between the plagues and potions and prayer, something like healing happened. You step through the gate. The twilight glade wraps around you like a shawl, spun from dusk and dew. Each step you take sinks slightly into moss so thick it feels like you're walking across the backs of 1,000 sleeping caterpillars. No offense to the caterpillars, of course. They're probably unionized by now. You wander slowly, as if your legs have finally caught up to the pace of the story. No urgency, no destinations, just you. A few sleepy bees lazily hovering near foxglove blooms, and the echo of that garden hum still trailing behind your ears. Mainstream historical fact. By the late Middle Ages, as Europe transitioned toward Renaissance thought, many insect-based remedies faded from official medicine. Physicians embraced anatomy, astrology, and Galenic humors in more structured ways. But in rural pockets, insect lore persisted, carried by midwives, herbalists, and stubborn grannies who knew a thing or two about beetle tea and wouldn't be told otherwise. You spot a stone circle tucked between two leaning trees, flat-topped, moss-covered. It almost looks like a meeting place or a storytelling ring. On each stone, an insect symbol is carved. Dragonfly, spider, louse, ant, bee. One is just a squiggle, possibly a worm, possibly abstract expressionism. Hard to say. You sit again. You're not tired, not really, but your thoughts have softened at the edges. That kind of mental fuzz where nothing's wrong and nothing's urgent, like floating in warm water, just listening to yourself. Breathe. Quirky tidbit, there's an 11th century tale of a peasant girl in Bohemia who swore that beetles spoke to her in dreams, offering cures in rhyme. While most dismissed her, one visiting nobleman tried her gnat-infused eye salve and, according to records, claimed he saw ghosts for a week. Whether that's a win or a side effect is unclear. Historians still argue whether the decline in insect medicine was due to scientific progress or social stigma. Some believe it was simply a shift in fashion. Bugs fell out of favor as flashy exotic plants from distant lands entered the apothecaries. Others say it was about control, confining medicine to universities and out of the hands of the barefoot healer whispering to ants behind a chicken coop. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere between those cobwebbed shelves and that sleepy garden. You reach into your pocket and feel something soft and familiar. The melted stub of that beetle-shaped candle, still faintly warm somehow. A reminder of the archive, the choir, the breath, the garden. Above you, fireflies begin blinking in earnest, and one lands briefly on your shoulder before flitting away. You're not sure if that counts as a goodbye or just a wing stretch, but either way it's sweet. You smile. Somewhere back near the monastery, a bell chimes once, a final nudge. Time to rest. And now, your feet slow. The moss beneath you softens even more, until you feel less like walking and more like floating. The glade around you breathes in, then out, long, slow, silent, as if even the trees are settling in for the night. The last of the fireflies blink overhead like sleepy stars losing track of time. You find a place to lie down. It's warm and gentle, like the inside of a worn quilt, and smells faintly of lavender and pine. You don't remember where your candle went, or how the beetle wax melted, or when the last cricket stopped singing, But none of that matters now. You close your eyes. Somewhere far off, a bee buzzes once, low and slow. It fades before you can even register the note. The leaves hush, the moss holds you, the night folds around you like soft wings. Maybe the beetles were healers. Maybe the monks just needed something to believe in. Maybe insects were never medicine at all, just little companions in a very big, complicated world. But here, in this quiet, it all feels okay. You're still, breathing slow, drifting light, and just before sleep takes you. A tiny sound, a whisper soft flutter, could be a moth, could be a dream, could be both. Sweet dreams, traveler.